Hey everyone, I'm children's book author Sohrab Rezvan. Today's video will provide a quick overview of the process I follow when writing a children's book. This video will quickly talk a little bit about myself, my perspective on writing, and then I'll go into some detail about my writing process. I have a technical background, having spent most of my career in the field of data analytics. I started writing more frequently in 2021 when I founded my publishing company, Flat Mountain Publishing. At this point, you may be asking yourself how I'm qualified to write children's books, or if I'm looking at the wrong script for this presentation. I think everyone's background in some way helps them when it comes to writing. For me personally, I tend to lean on my strong technical writing and proposal writing skills, and I combine that with my strong organizational skills that I've used to manage teams and large projects over the years. When I write, I tend to focus on my areas of interest. I'm probably better off writing things I know about or things that interest me. I'm not likely to find success writing romance novels, for example, because I've never read one. With all that out of the way, here are the steps I follow for my writing process. It's important to note that I'm specifically talking about self-publishing. If you're working with a traditional publisher, your process will likely look different. And even for your own self-publishing journey, your process may look different than mine. The video today really focuses on steps 1 through 10, and marketing will be left to a different presentation in the future. The process begins with an idea, and your ideas can really come from anywhere. I tend to find that my ideas are heavily influenced by my skills, my personal interests, and my kids. I tend to use my phone to write down random ideas that come to me. I've noticed that since I've started writing, my brain's always thinking about something writing related, and I tend to have lots of notes on my phone that I eventually organize when I get some time. Next, I expand on the ideas. You can think of this as more brainstorming. And it's also important to write everything down. Some ideas may be great, some maybe not, but you'll never know what works out unless you write it all down. I write down things like powerful lines, or parts of ideas, or seeds of ideas, some interesting scenes I have in mind, or different ways the plot could play out in a particular story. The next step is character development. I start to think about the characters and their personalities, and I start to write down different traits that the characters may have through the story. One thing to pay careful attention to is how the characters will change throughout the story. This is especially hard for a picture book where there's minimal dialogue. For me, I start to think about how I can use the art to demonstrate the change. The next step may sound obvious, but it's a lot harder to do than it is to say, and that's just to write. You may hear people say that you should write every day. As someone with a full-time job and a family, writing every day isn't always realistic. I do try to set aside time every day to do something on my book, whether it's writing or marketing or just organizing ideas. It is difficult to start, but just like anything else, once you start and set a routine, it's a lot easier to maintain. Once I have a solid draft, I start to go through revisions, and I tend to go through lots of revisions. I read my book aloud, I read it silently, and I'll focus on things like flow and word choice. I'll also send early drafts of my work to my family members or read it to my kids to get their initial reactions. Just keep in mind that your family members will be particularly nice with their feedback, so it's important to go through additional revisions, which we'll talk about later. Next, I take all my text and I put it into an initial book layout. It's a pretty simple structure with a page number, the orientation, which is the left page or right page, the text, and then some art direction. This structure helps me focus on the text and remove unnecessary language. If you're submitting your manuscript to an agent or a publisher, you probably don't need to use this format. But this does help me work on flow, pacing, and language, and it also helps me focus on showing and not telling, which is especially important for picture books. Once I've gone through the page layout process and made more revisions, I'll give the document another full review. When I think it's ready, I'll send it to a peer reviewer for additional feedback. I tend to use a mix of both paid and free peer reviewers. There are a number of published authors who will, for a small fee, review your manuscript and provide detailed information. For free options, you can look to a number of different writing groups. One excellent writing group is called SCBWI, or the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. They have a number of opportunities to meet with other authors as well as illustrators and to receive feedback on your work as well as review the work of others to help the community grow. Because you're self-publishing your work, you'll need to find an illustrator. Now, every illustrator will work differently and have a different style. You'll want to find an illustrator whose style matches the vision you had for your work. It's also important to find a partner who's willing to provide some recommendations and suggestions, because the illustrator will have a different perspective than you have as an author, and that perspective is important to making sure your book flows and is a good fit for your audience. For the pictures I'm about to show you, I used the talented illustrator Tony Pham. I found him through SCBWI, the group I just mentioned. We started with a tryout page where I described the book and the project, and he put a couple character sketches together, and from there we signed a contract. Once we had the contract in place and the character designs finalized, I provided my illustrator with the initial book layout that I showed you a few slides ago. From there, the illustrator worked on the rough page layout that you see here on the top left. After a little bit of back and forth, there is a little bit of a cleaner line art version that you see on the bottom left, followed by a colored page, and then the final page that you see on the bottom right adds a little bit more detail to emphasize a couple points that I wanted to get across with the graphics. With the manuscript and artwork complete, I turn my attention to finishing up the other material that goes in the book. This includes things like the copyright page, the about pages, the back of book material, and I always include a request for reviews in my books. I also put together the book metadata that I'll use when posting the book for sale, and I try to have at least the cover page of my next book done, so if people like my book, they'll follow me and be ready to buy the next one when it gets released. Once the book is complete, I start to get it ready for publication. I always purchase my own ISBN. This may not be appropriate for everybody, as some distributors provide their own. Amazon KDP, for example, provides a free ISBN, but there are limitations to distribution with that ISBN, so make sure you read those details carefully when you assign your ISBN. Every distributor that I use has a different upload requirement. So I've used typically KDP, which is from Amazon, and Ingram Spark. Each has a different format, and I try to order printed proofs to make sure that the final product looks exactly like I want it to look. With the book wrapped up and ready for publication, I turn my attention to marketing. I'll update my personal website, get social media posts ready, try to do marketing with local bookstores, libraries, and start to go to more book shows. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to both publishing and marketing, and if you'd like to know more, please drop a comment below and I'd be happy to put another presentation together. Thanks so much for watching.